Got it.
That was easy.
Okay. Hang on just 1 second. Alrighty. So our nonpartisan statement, the League acts in support of or in opposition to selected government issues which its members have studied. It does not support or oppose candidates, factions, or political parties. League members as individuals are urged to work in the political party of their choice. To protect the League's nonpartisanship policy, guidelines regarding the political activities of the board of directors are reviewed frequently. The League of Women Voters of Pullman is fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and practice. These concepts are central to our current and future success in engaging all individuals, households, communities, and policymakers in creating a more perfect democracy. We acknowledge and honor the first people of the Palouse region and their descendants, including our neighbors, the Nez Perce, Colville, and Coeur d'Alene tribes.
Thank you. You want to take it away, Susan?
Okay, I will start. I'll do a little introduction and then I'll share my screen. Starting with a caveat that I was not involved in the study. So this is based upon the Washington League study information. I'll take about a half an hour, and first I'll cover the Shoreline Management Act itself and then what the Washington League learned from its study. When I first heard about the Shoreline Management Act, I thought it meant the coast, the ocean and the coastline. But then I realized that it means all the shorelines in the state of Washington. It includes the rivers, lakes, wetlands, etc. The act itself only applies to significant shorelines, lakes over 20 acres, river with flows over 20 cubic feet per second. And it also covers the land from the water's edge to 200 feet above the normal high water mark. That's when you look at a shoreline and you see that line of debris up along the edge, that's the normal high water mark. In Whitman County, that means it applies to the Palouse River. Okay, I'll start share screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. So shorelines are an important part of our natural environment, and this health of our shorelines is important. Shorelines are provide habitat for a diverse array of species, the crustaceans, amphibians, birds, fish, and mammals. For human activity, commercial enterprises, transportation, recreation, and homes. They protect the water's edge from erosion, and they preserve water quality through filtering the runoff. They also buffer the shoreline, buffer the inland area from storms, especially on coastal areas. In the 1960s, people were becoming concerned about the degradation of the natural environment. And two events occurred which really woke up the environmentalists. The first was the Cuyahoga River caught fire. It wasn't the first time it had caught on fire, but this time it got a lot of publicity. And then there was a big oil spill in Santa Barbara, California, where thousands of seabirds and marine life perished. And that again got lots of publicity and really woke people up to the degradation of the rivers and the shorelines. Concerned citizens joined together to protect the forests, lakes, rivers, and coast, and the League of Women Voters of Washington was an active advocate in the push for protection of shorelines. The Washington legislature enacted the Shoreline Management Act in 1972, It was updated in 1995 and in 2003 had a major upgrade. The League of Women Voter continues to be involved in the shoreline issues. Okay. In 2022, after 50 years of the Shoreline Management Act being passed, the League of Women Voters of Washington decided it was time to study the implementation of the Shoreline Management Act. Okay. The Shoreline Management Act, or SMA. The basic premise of the Shoreline Management Act, I already went through that, is first well, there are three sometimes conflicting policies that are not ranked. First is protecting against the adverse effects to the public health and the environment, the land and its vegetation and wildlife, and the waters of the state and their aquatic life, while protecting generally public rights of navigation and corollary rights incident thereto. And you can just see in that one that there's a lot of possible conflicts in trying to manage this. The second one is promoting public access to shorelines. And the third is planning for and fostering all reasonable and appropriate uses with preference to water dependent uses. The 2003 update of the Shoreline Management Act added concepts of no net loss, of cumulative impact analysis, and specified the use of best available science. Local governments have shoreline master programs, which they're required to update to incorporate the changes in the Shoreline Management Act. And they were required to do the update from 2003 by 2014, and to do an update of every 8 years to incorporate any changes in the SMA that have occurred. As of 2021, 23 of the 259 jurisdictions had not done so, which means their SMPs do not implement no net loss or cumulative impact analysis or the use of best available science. The SMA is implemented by the Department of Ecology and by local governments through their SMPs. Whitman County is currently doing an update of its SMP. There are no major changes in it. They're mostly doing clarifications. The way it works is the Washington State Department of Ecology is responsible for making the guidelines and for oversight. There are 259 local jurisdictions that are responsible for implementing the guidelines by issuing permits for development. Okay. The Shoreline Master Program, or SMP, is required by the SMA. It's created by local jurisdictions to implement SMA policies for their local shorelines. The SMPs are both planning and regulatory documents. And they are important because they make the laws and the regulations that implement the SMA. The SMPs have to include a comprehensive use plan, use regulations, maps, desired goals, standard for local shorelines. The goals must include land use, environmental issues, public access, and environmental and historic resources. They require the use of all available information on hydrology, geography, topology, ecology, and economics. Before the SMP is adopted, the local government must do an inventory of their shorelines so they can create a baseline for a no net loss standard. And they have to identify development for a cumulative impact analysis. So no net loss is an important concept. Basically, overall, the ecology should not change. No net loss principles involve first avoiding, then minimizing and compensating for ecological impacts. Some indicators used to monitor no net loss are forest cover, shoreline stabilization, piers, docks and floats, roads and road crossings, water quality, shellfish closures, levees and dikes. There is some interest in changing the recommendations from no net loss to a net ecological gain. Then there's the cumulative impact analysis, which is another important aspect of the whole thing. Cumulative impacts result from the incremental impact of foreseeable development when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions. It should use the shoreline inventory as a baseline for the analysis. It should assess impacts on shorelines from development likely to happen in the next 20 years. And it should demonstrate how the draft shoreline master program will achieve no net loss over time. So the SMA is administered by local governments through the use of permits. The local government makes the regulations regarding permits in accordance with the SMA. Since each local jurisdiction does their own, the results vary from one jurisdiction to another. There are three types of permits. There is a substantial development permit, a conditional use permit, and a variance. There are also exemptions that do not require a permit. First, the exemptions. There are exemptions listed in the SMA itself for agricultural activities, drought emergency projects, forest practices, certain energy facilities, environmental excellence projects, fish habitat enhancement projects, remedial action under the Model Toxics Control Act, boatyard stormwater treatment upgrades, and certain Washington Department of Transportation facilities.
Susan, I'm sorry. So with an exemption, do you think that that means that they are exempt from the no net loss requirement, or?
No, they are exempted from having to get a permit.
Okay, so they,
But they still have to meet the requirements. They just don't have to go through the permit process.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm not quite sure how that works, but that's what. And the SDP exemptions are for normal maintenance of existing structures, protective bulkheads for single-family residences, emergency construction to protect property, navigational aids and channel markers, and construction by a lessee or contract purchaser of a single-family residence, and construction of a dock or a community dock under a certain size and dollar amount. But what you say, Anne, brings up the problem of oversight. So they're exempt from getting a permit, but they're supposed to meet the SMA regulations. And who's going to be sure that they do?
Yeah, that seems to be a huge issue.
Yes.
In the questions, the study. And so, you know, what Anne brings up made me think about the single family residences. And some people
we'll get to that.
Yeah, okay. I'll hold off. I'll hold off. All right.
Okay. And the permits, there are the three kinds of permits. That's the next one. Substantial development permit is required if the development is over a certain dollar threshold or interferes with normal public use. Then there's the conditional use permit, which is for projects that normally would not be allowed, but can be modified to make them consistent with the SMA. And there's the variance, which is used to allow a project to deviate from the SMP's dimensional requirements, like setback or height. The permits need to comply with SMA guidelines. Again, there's the issue of oversight. Okay. In addition to the requirements of the SMA and the SMPs, there are many state and federal acts that have requirements that affect shoreline management. And of course, some conflict. local governments have to manage a complicated bunch of regulations. And I'm not going to go through these, but there's a list of various state and federal laws that affect shorelines, have parts that affect shorelines. So the local governments have a pretty complicated business managing this stuff. The League of Women Voters of Washington decided to study the Shoreline Management Act since it had been in effect for 50 years. They were curious how the implementation has gone. Has it been effective? Are there any impediments to its implementation? The basis of the study was through interviews with people who worked with the SMA at one level or another. They interviewed over 18 representatives of state and local governments, ports, aquaculture industries, building industry, tribes, environmental organizations, the Department of Ecology, and in the Environmental Assistance Program. They also did a literature review, which revealed that even with the EPA being in effect for over 50 years, development and pollution have impacted the natural ecosystems of intertidal and subtidal areas. The results of the study are based on the responses from the 18 interviews. They gave 10 questions to each of the 18 interviewees, and they all answered the same 10 questions. The League did not go around collecting data on things. It's based purely on the results of the interviews. So first, the SMA has benefited our shorelines. That was every person interviewed believed that the SMA had been a benefit. It had protected against development. I'm on the next slide. It had protected against development by limiting overwater restaurants and hotels, residential development, and so on. And it improved shoreline armoring and local enforcement by removing or softening bulkheads and providing guidance to property owners. And they felt permitting provided a layer of protection for local planners against local politics. So the local planners might sometimes be influenced unduly by the local conditions, by the local property owners, by the businesses, and so on. And since they need to report to the state level has oversight on everything. It gives them a way to resist local pressures on something that might affect a greater area. And oversight, however, has been historically uneven, but the current Department of Ecology has made it a priority to improve communication between the state and the local government, and to establish a database of shoreline permits that can be documented and accessed to help keep track of everything that's going on, more than just the local area. So the policy goals, how is it done in achieving the policy goals? Well, the first policy goal was protecting the health, land, vegetation, and wildlife. And they found the respondents responded that the decline of the state shoreline has been slowed but not stopped. Many local jurisdictions have not updated their SMPs to meet the 2003 guidelines requiring no net loss and the use of best available science. There are no penalties for being out of compliance, and exemptions from the Act are difficult to understand, to administer, or for the public to keep track of, and lack of a public notification requirement make it difficult to enforce. And policy goal 2 was promoting public access and enjoyment of shorelines. There is concern for the future. Washington has 3,065 miles of coastline. Only 1,016 miles are publicly owned and have public access. By 1971, Washington had sold 60% of its tidelands and 30% of its shorelines to private owners. Many interviewees thought public access is adequate, but some had concerns that access may become more limited due to increasing population and increasing development. And policy goal 3, giving priority to uses that require a shoreline location. The 2003 SMA guidelines set forth a required prioritization scheme for preferred use. First was protection and restoration of ecological functions. The interviewees thought that we need more incentives for restoration. Restoration is not mandatory, which is a problem, and funding is a barrier to restoration. The second was water dependent and water related uses. Oh, I'm done. Let's see. So now I'm on concern for the future, policy goal 3. The second in priority was water dependent and water related uses. And there was a lot of concern that the rapidly growing shoalfish industry has outpaced regulating agencies' ability to manage the environmental and human health threats that are emerging. Mixed use developments that include and support water dependent uses. I didn't see any notes on that. Water related and water enjoyment uses. Rising population and increased development is increasing pressures on public access areas. And single family residential uses. Many interviewees felt that single family homes on the shoreline should not be exempted. In general, interviewers were concerned about inconsistent implementation of the Shoreline Management Act. So the conclusion regarding the effectiveness of the act: Washington State was a leader in protecting the shoreline in the early 70s. We've had over 50 years protecting our shorelines. SMA goals help limit shoreline development and eliminate extremely damaging development. And major strides have been made to clean up pollution, establish sanctuaries, and respect tribal treaty rights. However, balancing the policy goals can be difficult. There's many divergent interests. There's local government, tribal government, property owners, sport and commercial fishing, tourism industry, aquaculture, boaters, and people who just like to walk on the shores. Local jurisdictions have considerable discretion when balancing the goals, and SMP's administration is not consistent. And even when conditions are attached for ecological protection, implementation or maintenance may not be enforced. There is some good news. In 2021, the Department of Commerce offered a series of adaptive management and monitoring workshops, which included information from the Department of Ecology and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to train people on current best practices and tools. There was good attendance, but not all local governments sent people to the workshops. Interviewees thought attendance should be mandatory and finances allocated for it. The committee looked at areas of concern identified by more than one respondent and arrived at 14 issues that could help the act achieve its intended goals and respond to ever-increasing challenges such as population growth and climate change. Oh dear, sorry about that. So there are 14 of them. I'll read through them quickly, I guess. And this is what the what's it called? What the consensus meeting is going to be about. I think the items are drawn from this. Evaluating updates and periodic reviews to local SMPs to determine whether no net loss is being achieved. Reevaluating the effects of allowing certain exemptions. Evaluating whether balancing of the legislative policy goals should be weighted for more environmental protection. recommending quantitative standards developed to measure no net loss, making increased habitat restoration a priority and providing more incentives, improving public involvement in some areas, focusing more on the proliferating expansion of industrial aquaculture, the need for more robust monitoring programs and adaptive management, giving more attention to public access for the future, addressing climate change impacts that the existing law does not fully address, making ecology oversight of local programs critical, focusing more attention on enforcement programs with adequate funding and consistent follow-through, and highlighting the importance of training of staff, legal staff, and elected officials, and prioritizing incentives for restoration projects. And so that's the end of that. Let me hang that up and I'll be right back.
So in the chat, if anyone's interested, I just put a link to the City of Pullman Shoreline Management Plan, which looks like it was updated in 2016, if anyone's interested.
Right. They're working on it now, currently updating it. Let's see. I can stop share. So that's the overview. So I hope people will look at the, hi Deb. I hope people will look at the study. It has a lot more detail and examples, and it's pretty interesting. And then I guess that's it. I don't know if there are any questions, and if there are, I don't know if I can answer them, but.
Susan,
Yeah,
this is Tricia. My question is, I think, did we have some league members that attended the our commission, county commission, on that they addressed, I believe, the shoreline study. And this is, I can't come up with the.
I watched it. I watched it.
So what is their position? Is there anything that would inform us as we develop our consensus?
At the meeting, they didn't really talk about any details on their master plan. They just said that they were working on it. They're hiring someone to do it, and they're not making any major changes. It's mostly just details, making things clearer and so on, but not making any major changes to it. But they didn't go over what is in their plan per se.
Well, and that's why, if interested, if anyone wants to pull it up, just really briefly looking at the plan, it reiterates a bunch of the different things that Susan's saying about the history of the master plan, and it also has the no net loss in there. Again, I was just scrolling, through different things, but it certainly seems like that could give you, if they're talking about only doing really minor changes, looking at the 2016 one would maybe give you an idea if you have questions about it or, concerns on a local level.
Right. It sounded like it's not going to change much.
Yeah, and it seems like, I looked at the questions and the responses to those questions, the 10 questions, and it seems like the oversight of the plan was a pretty common factor with the respondents. Who's looking at this in a big vision. Who's looking at the compliance and all of that. I mean, that was my takeaway, is there's not enough oversight.
Right, I think so. And I kept thinking of the money, you know, you have to have the people who can do it. The people need to be trained who can do it. There's a lot, and how huge the job is. I had not realized what a huge job it is.
So what is the state league looking for from the local leagues in terms of what's the vote? You know, we're going to talk about a consensus vote on December 1st. What's the vote?
So I have not actually looked at the consensus questions, but anyone want to take that? Go ahead.
I've printed them out, and I think there's 8 of them. So 9 of them. So we won't be voting per se, but we'll be discussing them and reaching, you know, how if we want to have input responding to them. So for instance, let me find a question. The first question is, should the League of Women Voters of Washington take a position that the policy goals do not have equal weight and that the protection of the shoreline environment is more important than the policies of public access and fostering reasonable and appropriate uses and preferred uses? So from that, we're going to be, and I think what's really helpful with this study is they do, before that question's asked, they refer to sections of that 74-page study where you can find some of that information and have a discussion. But what they're looking from us is if we have, then they have these choices of strongly agree with that, agree, no opinion, disagree, strongly disagree. And we can also make comments. And what these are meant, go ahead, Deb.
That's pretty important. If you have a, you know, this is where we, you know, if there's no common, this is where dissension, you know, you can write down of conflicting opinions of the group, and they are taken into account. Actually, they're pretty strongly weighted sometimes, those areas of discussion. This, once we get this done, we submit it to the state. The state board then uses this to create
Positions.
position. Yes, thank you. And they will do this, and then they will take it. And so we can actually go and give testimony based on the position from coming out of this study. The position will be presented to the league at convention, and it will be voted on there. So that's why it seems like everything's crammed together timeline wise. It's because the state convention is in May. So they don't have a lot of time to work on this, but this is what consensus does. It creates a position that the league can stand on and say, well, we studied this and this was, everybody said this. So this is what our position on this act is and how it's being used.
So the more input that they get from a variety of leagues, they'll go through those to craft the position statement, you know, based on that. So conceivably, if, you know, as we're doing these questions, there's some that are just really easy for us and everyone kind of agrees, we can quickly move through those. If there's some where people have strong opinions and not really a common one, we can put that information down. Honestly, if there's something that everyone's like, I don't know how to touch this question, you know, I don't get it. We can skip it, you know, per se. So there's, you know, it is some work, and I think if people interested can take a bit of time before the meeting. Even reading, I found the executive summary, which is like 8 pages long, was really helpful. Also, again, the list of questions do have, they point you to parts in the study. I will say, reading through this, I always, once I get into the studies, am glad I have. I've been a little resistant because there's just so much going on and they're doing 2 studies. So I haven't pre-done much until like just, you know, yesterday before this meeting. from what I can see, this is like extremely well done and well written. And so if you have any time and inclination to look again, maybe starting at the summary, starting at there's a summary of, you know, responses of the 18 interviewees, right? Those things can give you, or gave me at least, like, oh, I you know, I can see some things with this and have a, like a somewhat understanding. And then ideally my hope is I will go and do some more before the December 1st meeting. Where I'll look at some of these, you know. Yes, Alice? Are you?
Oh, she's muted.
Or do you want to say anything, Alice? I'm sorry.
Well, I think that the real point is the league, if league members are concerned about governmental action in this area, then we need good solid positions. So as legislation comes up, essentially the state league gives testimony or writes letters and says, well, you know, there's 1,000 members of the state league, and we think that we've got to put more money into this. Shorelines are important, would, you know, be a basic position. And what I'm getting out of what you're saying is that we need money to, the act is good, we need money to implement it. It's important for the quality. Well, the Palouse River is very important for water quality all down the Snake, for instance. So it's not just the tidal shoreline, the ocean shoreline. So that's why the consensus is important. The more people who chip in and say, yeah, you know, we think the league should take a stand, and here are some of the stands that we need more money, whatever the questions cover. The more useful the study becomes, and the more influence we can have on governmental groups. For instance, I'm sure we have a couple of representatives who probably don't know they should share about the study. After
Yeah.
all, we only have the Snake River and the Palouse over here, but they're really important. And if we have this study behind us, then we may be asked as a local league to contact them and say, yeah, we know it's on the west, most of it's on the west side, but it's still important to us.
Sure.
That's really what the whole process is about with a study.
Well, and the fact that even though most of the stuff is on the west side, we care about the west side too. I mean, it's part of the world.
Economically, very important.
Yes.
What was interesting too, in just the little parts I've read, sorry, is they make a key point, like many of the interviews make a key point that we're also doing some of this for the visual, and for that it's important that we keep these things so that people can see them, even if you're not actively on, you know, on the water or impacted in that way. And besides money, or I think they're talking about funding and giving like teeth to something, you know, in terms of, are people monitoring this?
Yeah.
Another thing that multiple questions are looking at is, should everything be kind of equal level, or should we be looking at the things that are for the health of the climate? Should those be given more weight than some of these other concerns like public access? Like at the beginning, Susan talked about there's these three, you know, different things. Are they all equal, or do we need to start, you know, focusing more on environmental aspects?
You know,
So,
and
sorry.
that was a point that they made, is that, is it, you know, let's update this, because, you know, the original study was, you know, created before all the climate change issues came to the forefront. And does that change things? You know, do we need to consider the impact that has on shoreline issues? So it, you know, it looked like it was a very comprehensive study. So my question to you, Anne, I haven't seen any of those questions that are going to be
They're on the
proposed.
state website.
Okay,
You have to- but it's members only. You can't go, it's the special league members only places
Okay.
where the contentious questions
The
are.
questions I mean are the ones that we're gonna address
Yes,
on
that's where
December
they
5th.
are. They're on the members
there's-
only part of the
There's a link to
program.
it. There's a link to it on the website. When you click on the link, you get the page up and then you have to sign in to be able to see the.
Yes.
I wonder if I'm just already automatically signed in.
I'm
'Cause I found
thinking
it
we need
really
to,
easy
we need to
get
send that
into
out, obviously.
Yeah.
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 And how about the 8-page summary? Can that be sent to us too?
Yeah, that, the executive summary was good. The questions were good. And I thought those went out from Judy.
The the executive summary is basically the beginning of the 74-page.
Right.
So, and that was sent out as
There was
one
a
of,
link to that.
but it can certainly be we should send
Let's-
everything
yeah, and
out,
send
you
out-
know, in
I
the
was-
next.
I was
days.
planning to send out a link to all those links.
Okay,
After this.
very good.
I didn't know how far ahead of December 1st I should send it. Should I just send it right away? Give people time?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you might
Yeah,
want
me
to,
too.
send it again with the reminder about the meeting.
Yeah.
And that meeting has been scheduled for my house at 11:30 is the time we had. Does that seem
Mhm.
for the
What
people
did-
here?
What
at
day?
least?
What day?
It's
first.
Is it a Thursday?
It's the
December
first.
1st?
Yeah.
I believe it's a Thursday.
I don't know. I'd have to look.
I don't
They're
know.
kind of
Look at my calendar here.
I do not know.
Yes.
December
Thursday.
1st, Thursday.
Am I
Yes.
just talking? I keep going to mute and unmute. So,
And that's the cookie
No, we-
exchange.
yeah.
Cookies.
So it'll be an early time to get started on. Could be some old Thanksgiving things you have. Some fresh
Oh.
Christmas holiday.
Hey, it's
Whatever
my
sounds
chance
good.
to make cookies and not have to eat them all myself.
There
Right.
you go.
So I have
so-
another question. I have another
Yeah.
question. Was there any issue between the tribes and the other people interviewed that surfaced in this report?
I do not know.
Tribal government is separate. This is only state. Federal,
I thought the tribes were also interviewed.
They were.
some of them were, yeah.
So that's what I'm asking. If there were
I
any
didn't-
issues that came up that the tribes were on one
Oh.
side and everybody else was on the other side.
Mm.
I didn't
probably
look at
have
the
to look.
responses. I
They
didn't
they
look
do
at
have people's interview responses available. So I think,
I would like to
Um,
know if that's the
yeah.
case.
So it's at the back of it's in the appendix of the study. They have all the
Answer.
interviews responses.
Okay,
and I think there is a index to the study. Again, it is kind of, daunting. I mean, it sounds like, oh, we want people to read 74 pages, but I think you could pick and choose and it looks really well done, which
It has a
I'm
good index.
impressed with.
Mhm.
There's definitely a lot of effort went into
One
this.
really nice thing is right at the beginning. They have a whole page of the abbreviations like SMP, SMA. It's a whole page of them.
Yeah.
So you can look back real quick and say, oh, yeah.
I think we've all got some work to do.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
can you tell me where on the state league these questions are?
The consensus questions are under the members only.
I know,
can
I'm on members only.
Program of action. And it should be, then come up as Shoreline.
What's the thing, action? What?
Program of action, I believe.
Program of work.
Program of work. Okay, sorry.
Okay,
Action work, I get confused sometimes.
doesn't seem to want to open. Doesn't work for me.
Okay, I'll check it again and see.
I'll send the links out right away.
Mhm.
That'd be great. Thanks.
I just posted in, not what you're asking about, but the summary to the questions, which Libby might be interested in. Even though they have a summary to the questions, but they don't say,
Who?
oh, this one doesn't say who they are, but I swear it's somewhere. So maybe
It's in
that's
an
not very helpful what I
appendix.
just put in.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's the appendix to the report.
Let's see. And then here's the study itself that I just put in, which is the 74-page document. Which of course, yes, this should go to, you know, all members, but let's see, program of work. Sorry that I'm muttering to myself here.
That's okay. Most of the respondents to the questions were on the west side. They did ask east side people, but no one would respond to their questions. So that's why it seems to be weighted to the west side.
Oh, here we go.
It doesn't seem to me on something like shorelines that east side, west side has much to
It
do
shouldn't
with it.
matter, no. Everybody thinks shoreline, they think ocean. They don't realize there's lakes and rivers and
Wetlands and
yeah, wetlands.
estuaries.
Yeah. That's another thing that's come up since the actual 2003 update is the boom in the aquaculture taking place along the shoreline. I mean, the shellfish industry had just exploded.
There's a lot about that in the study report.
Yeah.
It's sort of horrifying.
Yeah.
I think I just got on the questions. I will say that it's kind of odd. Maybe they're going to present something else, but the questions are kind of embedded in a whole bunch of, you know, like they say environmental protection, and then they give some information, and then they give some discussion, you know, posing questions to get you on discussion, and then they have consensus question 1. And so you kind of have to look through this blob of material.
Yeah, that's for the people for running the meetings, the consensus meetings. It's supposed to focus you on a question. It's supposed to.
Oh.
There's supposed to be directives. No.
Did you see it presented any other way? Okay.
No, I think that's the only way, because I attended the consensus meeting, how to run them, and that's what she showed us. That where they try and give you that introductory, and then you have to go for the question.
You don't have to do that, but it could be helpful.
Yeah.
We might think about, and I could just type this up, just making a document where we type up the questions and have that be, because it'll look easier in terms, and I can do that.
Yeah. One thing for people ahead of time, though, it might be useful for someone ahead of time who wants to look at the questions and think about them.
Yeah.
Sort of in good background information for that.
Yeah, and we have no idea how many people are going to show up. If it's a big crowd, we'll split people up, like, divide the room into groups and handle just a certain number of questions.
Do you think we'll be turning people away?
I'm just hoping we get 9 people, then we can have 3 groups. They can, each group can do 3 questions, and then we can get together and sort of.
Oh, that's,
go through.
But again, we're looking at Thursday the 1st at 11:30. Does that time make sense to the people that are here or potentially coming? Okay. Okay. But this is good. It's a reminder of not that every time we meet is an educational, but it's It's kind of
Yeah, this
interesting
is-
and people just need to make, not, I mean, you can come and not have done anything, you know,
No,
before,
that's
but any bit of time you put in will be
It will help.
worthwhile. And you don't need to come and be like, you know, super, you know, done all this research, super informed, you know, and however, if you've glanced at things, it will make it where you'll feel more, you know.
Yeah,
I'm
you'll
not
appreciate what
articulating
those
anything.
people who
Something
wrote
like-
the study did. Because that was a lot of
Participating-
work.
Participating in the consensus stuff is a really important part of League. It's really important to the function of League and making League work.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, I don't think that those, I mean, they have they have a button at the top on the state league page, and it says studies and reports, and here's the Shoreline Management Act study. So
Mhm.
I don't think it's under members only, which I couldn't find. a members
The study is not, but the consensus questions are.
only.
The study
I-
is public, but the consensus questions are members only.
Yes.
And where do you find the members
So-
only on that page?
Well, so I think Susan had sent me something that got us to that. Again, that last link that I put on there is the consensus questions are on that document.
Okay,
You click on that and then you'll have to sign in to actually see the document.
okay, now I found it. Okay. I got it.
But yes, we should make it easier for everyone.
I'll
Because
put
it can
together, all
Yeah.
the links and a December 1st and send it out. Send it to
Okay.
So,
Judy.
so Anne, I just opened
Yes.
that first link that you sent in the chat, and there were 10
code?
questions there. Are those not the consensus questions?
No,
With the
those are not
answer?
the consensus questions.
Well, what questions are those?
Those were
study
questions they
questions.
posed to the 18 people they interviewed, and they were
Oh.
summaries of the responses.
So it's the last link, those are the consensus questions that you
Yes,
sent?
the last link has the consensus questions. Again, it is not super reader friendly. So if you open it, you might be like, these aren't the consensus questions, but
Uh-huh.
they're within these other, and so I think I will, unless you want to, Susan, I could just type out the consensus questions and save a document that says consensus questions
Okay,
and
yeah.
send it to you.
That would be- Yeah.
Yeah,
think
when I
that's
clicked
easier.
on it, I was told that was a link to the consensus questions and I clicked on it and I didn't see them. And so I emailed them back and I said, these aren't, where are the, and they said,
Yeah.
oh, they're in there.
It's not very friendly. So I don't know if you need to, but Susan or Deb, are you interested in meeting with myself or Tricia and I just sometime before the meeting at coffee, or is that not necessary? I'm good either way.
Well, Deb's kind of the lead on consensus questions. I like to
Um,
meet.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to get together and get a
Okay.
plan in action so we can have a good half hour of socializing and then get down to business.
Okay, I'll send something out to the four of us. And Alice, you're out of town, correct? You're usually my,
Can't hear you, Alice.
I am out of town. I'll actually be on an airplane during that meeting, so I cannot come. Sorry, because I have a long-term interest in this.
yeah. Well, if you have anything you want to submit about any of those questions, please do. And we'll miss you at the, but I think we'll get through it pretty well. So, well, I want to thank Deb and Susan for, going through this and having a presentation that made me kind of get off my hands
Oh,
off
it
approach to
was
it and
all
start
Susan.
looking.
She did all the work.
Wow.
Thank
I
you,
just-
Susan. It was really
Yeah, thank
interesting.
you.
Well,
Yeah,
Well,
thank you. And hopefully
good.
we'll see some or all of you on the 1st. I know it's busy, but
I'll tell you, it
Susan or
felt
Deb?
really long. It felt really long when I was saying it. And then when I timed it, it was like 25 minutes.
That was great.
Yeah,
was-
that's
It went
about
well.
how long people can listen.
It's nice to see everybody, though.
Yeah. Thanks.
You
And
don't get
Susan,
to
give my
say
best to your
old.
husband.
Yeah, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Alice came
Mucinex.
late. You didn't hear that Paul has COVID. Paul and his brother have COVID. Did you hear that?
Oh, no.
And they're on a boat. Well,
Yeah,
on a
they're on
cruise
a
ship.
cruise. Oh,
Ick.
oh, no
Been
kidding.
on for-
And they're fully vaccinated, you know, careful.
Yeah.
Never
know.
crossed my mind that that could happen.
Yeah, it's the last few months or 6 months, it seems like it's potentially getting everyone.
Yeah.
Gotta go. Bye, y'all.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't stop recording.